Hey, and welcome back to the next part of our Guitar 101 beginner guitar course. Today we are going to look at the fretboard, and that is where your fretting hand, your offhand in terms of if you're right-handed, this will be your left hand, vice versa for y'all lefties out there, and this is going to be what is going on with these, the frets. We've talked about those before in orientation. How do you navigate this and come to understand it? And so that's going to be the topic for today. I also want to take a quick moment and highlight the guitar that we're going to be using for this, and this is a new Squier debut from Amazon. I've got a review on it. I'm not sponsored by Amazon or any of that sort of thing. I bought this with my own money and wanted to see what the lowest level, this is the really like sub-economy level. This is a $120 new guitar, and as you see if you take a look at my review, I was very pleasantly surprised with what I got. I've seen other guitars in this price range that are just junk or need a lot of work in order to get playable. This was very nearly close to setup out of the box. So take a look at my review if you're interested in a $120 new guitar. Otherwise, stay with us here, and we're going to be taking a look today at the fretboard and how to navigate it as a beginning guitarist. Alright, so here we have the open first position. Now this is where everybody has to start. You all got to start somewhere, and what that means is the first fret, which this is the first fret. So to speak of fretting on number 1 is to hit the note on that particular string on this fret. Now we will dedicate later an entire lesson about how to make a good note. Right now we are just orienting our fretting hand. And so the diagram here follows the first position, and that is when your fingers are at 1, 2, 3, and 4. Everyone starts here, and I know this can just look like, oh my gosh, there's so much going on. Just take a breath and we're going to work through this. Okay? So this is first position now, and that means that our first fret right here is our first finger. Okay? So these are starting from the highest. You put the high E as a little e here. Okay? If we were to make an open note, that is a high E. On the last, the 6th string, the bottom, that's the low E. So those are the same note, different octaves. Now I've got this colored so that you can see the different notes according to colors. So while it is helpful, very helpful, especially if you've already begun to learn music, this is a great way to transition to guitar, is if you already know the letters for the notes, that is A through G, okay, and you know that it repeats again after G. Now this is all some just basic musical theory. We'll devote some more time specifically to understanding the relationship of music theory and guitar later, but for right now we just need to know that all notes on the fretboard have an associated letter, and if they are between, then you have a note that is either sharp or flat. It is the same note, but it depends on the key. And I know that's a lot to take in right now, but just to understand, at this point, every fret on every string up and down has, if you are using standard tuning, as we've discussed, E, A, D, G, B, high E, if you are using standard open tuning here, then all of these will correspond as we are going to discuss. So again, we are starting in the first position and just looking at the fact, first of all, that, and we've discussed this in tuning, but here we can see it represented. So let's go up the bottom string here. E, F, F sharp, because we're just going to do sharps right now. This would also be G flat, but we're just going to call it F sharp right now. G, G sharp, and then A. And this is why first position, if you are also using open strings, you never in theory have to move out of open position, and you can get all of the notes actually in multiple octaves. So one thing to learn is to begin. This is where we're at, 101, beginner guitar. Where do you begin? Where do you start? You start in first position, because you've got all the notes here. Everything that you need to start playing music is going to be in first position. I'm just going to run through all the notes going up chromatically. Alright, so that's all the notes on your screen there played on the first 4 frets. And that is because the 5th fret of your bottom string, bottom E, your 5th fret here is your next string. Your A for the next string. Same thing on the next one. 5 to the next open string, then 5 to the next open string. Now this is where it gets different, and it is just something that you have to be aware of in standard tuning. Your next one is not going to be on the 5. You see here, 5 is not the next open string, it is 4. So 4 is going to be your next string, which is B. Then it's 5 again, B up to the high E. So again, to begin, this is where you want to start. You want to start in open first position, and just starting out, again, this is just, you know, getting the basics. You have to build the foundation of a house before you build the walls and the roof. The foundation here is that you need to learn how to play the basic chromatic scale going up from the low E up to that A. This is not like you're going to play this in a song, but just getting your fingers so you can do this reliably. And don't focus on speed. We're going to have a lesson later about practice. Don't worry about speed at this point. Right now, the focus is just going to be on getting those notes and fretting them correctly. Now, we'll talk in more detail about getting a good clean tone, but you basically want to fret, you want to pinch, not completely on there. There is something where you can do a cool muted sound by going on there, but for right now you want a good clean tone, which is that you are going to pinch between the frets and closer to the fret that you're fretting, the fret that you're pressing there. Alright, so again we are starting on first position. That is where your fingers are on 1st fret, 2nd fret, 3rd fret, and 4th fret. Now we just looked at what's called the chromatic scale, and that is all the notes. And don't worry about getting, you know, too deep into the alphabet of notes and all that right now. This is part of my method in terms of how I explain playing guitar and how I understand playing guitar, is that it is not about memorizing notes. Now it is good to understand the layout of the fretboard, and as we get into higher level lessons we will see this develop, but knowing how to navigate the fretboard is less about knowing, well, that's a B and that's a C sharp, as it is knowing patterns and shapes. That is the most important aspect, as I understand it, in playing guitar, is to understand patterns. Another way of looking at this is intervals. How many are together in a row, and then how many do you skip? Do you do one on, one off, one on, one off? See, look at here. You have the open E, followed by the first fret. So those two are together. Then the next one is skip one, then skip one again. So what is important is knowing these shapes, the patterns. That's ultimately what's going to be most important. And so just like we are starting in first position because you have to start somewhere, you have to start at the foundation of a house, here we are going to start with the key of C major. Now don't fret, don't worry yet about what keys and all of that means. All that you need to know at this point is that a key is going to determine which notes are in the scale. And the key of C major, again, don't worry about all this quite yet. We will look at keys much later in more detail in another lesson. But for right now, C major means that if you are looking at the staff of a piece of music and there are no flats, that is this little B, and no sharps, that is this little number looking grid guy here, if there's no waffles and no B's, then it is C. Okay, no sharps or flats, then it is in C major. Now it can also be in A minor, but don't worry yet, don't worry, that relative major minor, that's later stuff. Okay, right now we are just starting in the easiest, and it's easiest because there are no in-between notes in terms of there are no sharps, there are no flats. You see, all of these are blocked out. Another reason why C major is so good to start with in terms of the first scale, the first key to learn, because you can see on here that you don't need to use yet your fourth finger at all to navigate the scale of C major. Now you say, well, wait a second, what about number 4 there? You see all the rest of the 4s are blocked out. What about 4 there? Aha, wait, that's on the G string, and number 4 goes up to the next string. So 4 here is going to be the next string, so you don't have to hit that. Okay, you can actually navigate this entire key, which now we're looking at it as a scale, which is simply to play through the notes of a key. That's simply playing through all the notes up and down, all the notes in first position in that key. Now, this is a great place to stop in terms of just, you want to be able to do this. You want to be able to run through the scale. We'll talk about scales in more detail later, but for right now, here is your shape. It is 0, 1, 3 on the lowest string, then the next string 0, 2, 3. Same thing on the next string, 0, 2, 3. Next string is just 0, 2, then 0, 1, 3, and then that again, 0, 1, 3. So you notice now, of course, your lowest and your highest string are always going to be the same because they are both E in standard tuning, so their notes are always going to be the same. It, in effect, repeats itself on the top. Now you notice that there are basically 2 shapes here, 1 and 3 and 2 and 3. Now G is just 2 and 3 without the 3. So you really only have 2 basic shapes here, and this one's just diminished in that you don't have that 3rd fret note. 0, 1, 3, 0, 2, 3, 0, 2, 3, 0, 2, 0, 1, 3, 0, 1, 3. That is your first scale to learn. These are the first shapes to learn, and it is also a really, really great way as a beginner to start to feel confident about navigating the fretboard, because this first key, you don't need your pinky yet, because it's going to take time to really work up the strength so you can do a long grab with your pinky and make a good sounding note. It just takes time. So as you are developing the muscles as you are developing the muscle memory in your hand, starting with a key, starting with a scale that you can play only using your first 3 fingers and not having to do any stretches with those 3 fingers. That is a great way to start. So this is why with beginning students, I steer them first and foremost to first position, that is 1, 2, 3, 4 with your 4 fingers, and then begin learning first in the key of C major. Alright, so there are 2 ways to go up in terms of from a lower to a higher note. One of those ways is to go up a string, as in you're going higher as you go to the thinner strings closer to your fretting hand. So low E, high E, going up. That's what we were looking at in this open first position, is being able to go up each string. Okay, so that's traveling up by going up the strings in the same position. Now, we are not at this stage going to start worrying about slides and moving your hand around and that sort of thing. That will come with time, with practice, and so forth. First and foremost, you need to start out in that open first position and get comfortable there before you start branching out. But the other way, that if you take a step back and look at the fretboard, a few things to notice here. The other way that you go up is by sliding, continuing to slide up the string to the higher frets. Okay, and this is a really cool thing about a guitar, is that you can play the same note, the same exact note in multiple places. That is what we do when we do the tuning, when we tune one string to the next tune. You're playing the exact same note in 2 very different places. This one is on the 5th fret and this is the open. Okay, so that is really, really cool. Not many, like you can't do that with a piano. Piano has 1 key for each note. Here you actually have multiple spots that you can play, and that allows a whole world of tonal opportunities to come out. Now this is mostly a preview at this point, in terms of you got to get good at that first position. You got to build the foundation before you build the house. You need to start somewhere and build there. But the other way is by moving up the string. And the really cool thing here in looking at the fretboard, you notice you have, sometimes there's a dot on 1, sometimes the first dot is on 3. You've got dot on 3, dot on 5, dot on 7, dot on 9, and then double dot on 12. Now what's the deal with the double dot? Why not just one more dot? What's going on there? The double dot is the octave. So you literally run through all of the notes, including the sharp flats, right? You run through all of them in an octave by going from your open string to your 12th fret. That is where it octaves and repeats in terms of it starts back over again. Now, some guitars actually go up a full 2nd octave to a 24th fret. Most guitars will have 21 or 22 frets. But this is just an important way to realize, you know, there is so much ahead of you on your journey in guitaring. There is so much to learn once you get into all the navigation, but it all will ultimately break down into patterns, shapes, patterns and shapes. That's really ultimately the way to best, in my opinion, because there's lots of methods. This is what stuck with me, so hopefully it will help you, is to learn those patterns. Now this is also going to help when you start getting into, as we will with a later, when you start to get into chords, because chords are patterns where you are playing multiple strings all at the same time. But it all comes down to patterns and shapes. And so don't worry about the rainbow grid and oh my gosh, there's so many notes and how do I learn it all? Just start off with the basics. Start in that first position, play through those strings, understand how they move one to the next string, start working up and down, get used to playing those, get used to playing, and after you get, basically you start getting your fingers to do what they want to do, and you've learned that key of C, then those shapes that you've learned here are going to repeat themselves all over the fretboard. And that's the wonderful thing, is that once you've unlocked the shapes and their relationship to each other, you've got it. You can switch keys so easily, way more easily than many other instruments. You can, oh, you want to play that? Well, I can throw a capo, or I can just move my hand this many frets. All of that is going to unlock, and guitar will become very, very natural to you. But you have to build, first and foremost, on a strong foundation, and that is learning first position and learning all the notes in first position, learning key of C, learning those first basic shapes. These are the first steps towards unlocking the fretboard.